Hailing from Canada, Kal Joffress is a serial entrepreneur and social innovator with a focus on leveraging technology to overcome social challenges ranging from preventing diabetes to improving secondary education. He is also the co-founder and CEO of Tandemic, a Kuala Lumpur-based social innovation firm. Kal is also the key architect of Make Weekend, a program that brings youth together where they have worked on design challenges to improve primary education and disaster reliefs. Kal is also the technology developer of Do Something Good, an online volunteering platform that marries volunteers to NGOs and corporates to NGO. And today, Kal speaks to theageproperty.com on his social entrepreneurial journey. So Kal, can you tell us a bit what Tandemic does?
So you're probably familiar with a lot of companies that have research and development departments or innovation labs. We're kind of like that. We're an innovation lab, but our major focus is work in the social sector. And kind of what we bring to the table in all of these different challenges is an approach to innovation, where we look at new ways of designing interventions, products, and services that can help address these challenges.
So what actually brings you here from all the way from Canada to Malaysia, and what actually pushed you into, being in the social entrepreneurial scene?
Well, I was initially brought over to work as a consultant with an investment fund, so my work was focused on looking at investments in the creative industries in film, animation, and games. And I was in Malaysia, and so I decided to start Tandemic, really to look at new ways of addressing social challenges. So I saw how the corporate sector was benefiting tremendously from innovation in the last 50 years. And so to bring innovation into the social sector became a big part of our mission and how we think about addressing social challenges.
But right now, we zoom in a little on Malaysian property developers, as we know that many of them actually now has a CSR initiative as part of their company, plan. But how do you think that, the real estate sector, the players in this sector, that they can innovate in terms of their CSR projects?
So I think one thing that's important to think about from the very beginning is that there are different levels of CSR engagement for companies, right? And so what you just described, visiting orphanages and making contributions, we would call that corporate philanthropy, and it's really the most basic level of responsibility.
Yes.
A level higher is the responsibility piece, which is around company ethics and sustainability. A lot of it is focused on risk mitigation for companies. So really thinking about, what is the environmental sustainability of our organization? How are we thinking about the suppliers that we're working with? Are they going to get us in trouble? Technically not a responsibility of theirs, but ultimately because as a property developer, I think, and as any kind of company, you're responsible for your whole value chain. And next level is around shared value. And so the concept behind shared value is to create value both for the community and for yourself as an organization, right? So ultimately, investing in corporate responsibility or CSR should be something that generates some kind of return to the organization as well as the community, and finding that overlap isn't always easy. But I think a really interesting area for developers to explore is this idea of building rich, authentic and empowered communities around the properties that they're developing, and not just within the property, but I think the whole community and beyond. Community can be a differentiator for property developers. Anyone can build a building. Not everyone can build a place where people have a sense of belonging, right? And ultimately, that's what people are going to pay for, right? There can be differences in quality of the finishing of homes and things like that, but the real thing that people pay for is the idea of quality of life,
right?
I
mean, that's the ultimate objective that all, those who are looking to buy not just a home, but it's a kind of lifestyle, it's a kind of community that they're buying into, right?
Yeah, and I think property developers are already kind of onto the game of, it's a lifestyle, and they're not purchasing the house, they're actually purchasing a better self, or they're purchasing a better family.
Yes.
Now, one of the implications of building this kind of community is it requires a very different kind of capability for property developers, right? So you need people who are who are community builders and community managers, people who will build genuine long-term relationships. So coming in and doing CSR as a property developer isn't what could we contribute as a property developer? What can we give you as the community as a property developer? What can we give to underprivileged people in the community? I think that's one aspect, which is community. The other aspect, which is quality of life, is I think thinking about the future of how people will live. And responsibility isn't an add-on. It ought to be something that is integral to the organization's business, and it should deliver shared value. So it should represent an overlap between what are the community's interests, what are your customers' interests, and sort of what are the interests of the company, right? How do we ensure that the company can do this sustainably?
So it's a shared aspiration between the developer and the home buyers, am I right?
Yeah, I think it's a shared aspiration, but it's also a shared set of actions as well, right? And it's co-investment. One of the things I see increasingly is adversarial relationships between citizens and government and property developers. And once we have these conversations about how do we build a better shared future, those conversations surface what are opportunities to do things better, what are issues that we can address as a community, not just for the developer. And those issues will be very different from community to community, right? I think that developing the solutions with the communities is going to be what's going to deliver real value as well for the communities.
I've came across actually transit homes for young couples who are unable to afford their first home. So the Malaysian government is actually doing something for these young couples. But what about transit home for the homeless? Do you think that property developers can, play a role in this?
Yeah, absolutely. So temporary shelter is a super important part of the ecosystem that serves homeless people. And so I think beyond just the provision of temporary shelter, it's super important to figure out ways to provide permanent shelter for people who are homeless. And what that means, I think, for property developers is thinking about what are the business models that we can adopt. I think there's a really big need for permanent housing for people who are homeless. One thing that I think is really important to highlight just around the issue of homelessness is that for the vast majority of people who are homeless, it's not a choice. What that means is that there are really big opportunities to help them out just by providing a bit of a leg up, and I think also by working with other organizations that are helping address the issue of homelessness.
So just now zooming out a little, how do you think that SMEs can they afford to have CSR as well? And what about man on the street?
Yeah, absolutely. As an entrepreneur myself, I want to make sure that I'm working with suppliers that are taking good care of their staff and that have the right kinds of ethics, because I think if there's an ethics problem in one part of their business, the likelihood that there's an ethics problem in another part is pretty high, right? But I think another area is to think beyond just thinking about giving money, right? Okay. So to spend some time twice a week volunteering with a local organization, or getting your staff to volunteer with a local organization, has much more impact. The power of consistency and the power of doing something locally in your community is much greater than giving money.
Yes.
And one of the biggest challenges that a lot of social organizations face is that people come in and they do things that are one-off. And I think as small organizations, what we can all do is we can find out, not just what are the things that are broken, but what are some of the things that are working really well, and how can we help more of that happen? And it doesn't necessarily cost any money.
So apparently you have co-founded a co-working space called Mixed Space. Can you tell us a bit about your co-founding experience?
Yeah, so a couple of partners and I co-founded Make Space a few years ago when we thought co-working spaces were a really big opportunity, but also specifically that one of the areas that would be really interesting to explore is the idea of making. So the idea that as individuals we are not just consumers, but that we're people who can go and craft new products. People are fundamentally creators and they want to do things with their hands. And so Make Space was not just a co-working space, it is also a space where you'll find 3D printing equipment and other kind of tools that will help you build new things. And we realized that there are a couple of important things that I think are key to getting any kind of co-working space or community right. The first and most important one is the community manager. The idea of co-working space in service offices has existed for a very long time. But the reason that now we're very excited about co-working spaces is because there are these centers where we hope that all of these innovative startups and organizations will come. But how do you actually get those organizations there? The answer is by building community. And that's how you keep them there as well, right? The second one that I think is really important that a lot of co-working space creators sometimes overlook is the importance of private space. So if you're working as an individual freelancer, working in an open plan office is fine.
Yes.
But as soon as you start working in a team, you're actually going to want to have a lot of private conversations. It's actually really, really important to have team spaces or private spaces where teams can settle in and where they can nest and they can sort of make that space their own. The last one is really around the importance of event space. So it's not just about working. It is also about the fact that there is space available to run events that creates community, and to be able to provide that space for free or at a super low cost is one of the crucial things that gets people into your space, that builds community in that space and that builds connections there.
All right. But what about your own office? How do you ensure that ideas flow effectively between you and your co-workers?
Well, for our office, we have a kind of a mix of open spaces and closed spaces. So a lot of teams work in closed spaces, but all together. And then some people can choose to work in sort of some of the open plan areas. And then we have places where people can work individually. We have a very young team, and people can be very distractible. So I think having a quiet spaces where you can really do deep thinking work is an important part of the whole equation. Now, for us, what ensures that ideas flow between teams is not about our physical layout or our space. It is about the systems and processes that we put in place. So for example, we have a weekly all hands meeting. And as part of that all hands meeting, every person who leads a project needs to talk about some of their lessons learned during the week. We really ensure that when people share in that weekly meeting, that they have spent time reflecting on what they're sharing, and they have some interesting idea to contribute. And it's also about expectation. So we expect team members to contribute articles and sort of showcase new ideas that they're working with to the rest of the team through our WhatsApp chat and other sort of communication tools that we use at the organization.
So thanks, Kal, for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
So guys, it's a wrap. Thanks for staying with us. Stay tuned to this platform as theageproperty.com speaks to various personalities for our Virtual Property Expo 2017. Thank you.